Today's daf is Menachos daf Kuf Zayin, and we will begin from the Mishnah on the bottom of daf Kuf Vav Amid Beis. Dr. Mishnah Harei Olai Eitzim. If somebody says that he is going to bring Eitzim as a nedava to the Beis Hamikdash, Lo yivchos mishnei gzirim. So even though he didn't specify how much eitzim he's going to bring, the amount is predetermined. He has to bring 2 logs of eitzim. The Gemara is going to explain. Levayna, if he says that he's going to bring levayna, lo yivchos mikaimetz. So he's supposed to bring a kaimetz of levayna. Again, even though he didn't specify how much levayna he's going to bring, the shear is a kaimetz. Chamisha kmatzim. Says the Mishnah, there are 5 areas in halacha as we come to the end of Masechtas Menachos and spoke a lot about a kaimetz. So there are 5 areas in halacha where you find a shear of a kaimetz. Number 1, if somebody says a re'elai levayna, the Mishnah we just learned, he has to bring a kaimetz of levayna. Haminadev mincha, if somebody says that he's going to bring a mincha, yavi ima kaimetz levayna. Certain menachos had levayna that came along with it. How much levayna? Also a kaimetz. Hamayles a kaimetz bachutz chayev. If someone is maila from a carbon mincha bechutz, whether it's soilus, whether it's levayna, how much does he have to be maila in order for him to be chayiv? There's a shear. The shear again is a kaimetz. And then finally, shnei beziche, the 2 beziche levayna that came along with the lechem apanim, tu'unin shnei kamatzim, had to have a kaimetz in them respectively. Thus, you have the 5 kamatzim. Rashi and Tosfos both ask the obvious question. You want to talk about an area in halacha where there's a halacha of kaimetz, what's the first halacha that would come to mind? You bring a carbon mincha, you do kmitza, you take the kaimetz and you put it on the mizbeach. The chelik of the mincha that went legvaya in most menachos was the kaimetz. So, l'chur, it's ikachasam and hasefer. So Rashi says that it's true. In theory, that should have been the first one. But being that the Mishnah was anyways going to mention hamaylas hakaimetz b'chutz chayiv, that the shir for halas kaimetz is a kaimetz, that's how much you have to be mile in order to be chayiv. What's the reason for it? Because you're only chayiv for halas chutz keneged what would be considered a halah b'fnim. So says Rashi, by telling me amaylas hakaimetz b'chutz chayiv, essentially the Mishnah already told me that the shir haktara b'fnim is also a kaimetz. I realize if somebody says he's going to bring zav to the Beis Hamikdash, lo yivchos mi dinar zav. He has to give a dinar, which is a coin made out of gold. Kesef, if he says he's going to bring silver, lo yivchos mi dinar kesef. Nechoshes lo yivchos mi ma'a kesef, a different type of coin made out of nechoshes. Pirashti v'nedei ma pirashti. Let's say somebody says that I made up that I'm going to bring gold to the Beis Hamikdash, but I don't remember how much. So he didn't say Harei Olai Zav. He gave an amount. He just can't remember what the amount was. Was it 1 coin? Was it 2 coins? Was it $100? Was it $1,000? So the halacha is, Yehei Mevi, he has to bring, meaning he has to go l'chumrah. So if he knows for sure that he didn't say 10,000 dinrei zav, so you don't have to give 10,000 dinrei zav. If he knows for sure he didn't say 9,000, then he doesn't have to give 9,000. But up until where he can tell you for sure that's not how much it was, he would actually have to bring, because misafik, you always go l'chumrah. Either way, the theme of the Mishnah was somebody made a nedava to gavaya, whether it's to hektish, nidrei hektish, or whether it's to kachei by the kabayas, and he didn't specify exactly how much he's being menadev. So the halach is, the Mishnah tells us exactly what he needs to do. It says in the pasuk, talking about the carbon mincha v'nefesh ki sakriv carbon mincha Hashem, the word carbon is extra, and it comes to teach me that there's a concept of a new type of carbon. What's that carbon called? Eitzim. So you can bring a carbon eitzim. Now most carbonas had eitzim that came along with the carbon. Thus, there was always going to be eitzim on the mizbeach. He needed eitzim, the atzim haracha. That's when he made the fire. That's where everything went down. But there's a chiddush that eitzim in and of itself can be considered a carbon. V'kama, what's the sheer carbon eitzim? Shnei gzir. V'cheinu oimer v'hagoyrolais he palnu al kurban eitzim. It's a pasuk in Nehemiah. So you see over there that the pasuk refers to eitzim sometimes as a carbon. Rabbi says eitzim carbon name. Eitzim is a carbon, and as a result, tunin melach. You have to salt it. Al kol karban chatakriv melach. If you're going to put eitzim on the mizbeach, shnei gzir eitzim, you have to salt it. Utunim hagasha. Not just that, being that what's the makar to the carbon eitzim, it's learnt out from a pasuk that's discussing the carbon mincha. So not only do we say that you can bring a carbon eitzim, but we know the type of carbon it's going to be. It's going to be a carbon mincha. And being that most carbonates mincha required hagasha, the carbon eitzim would have a din hagasha as well. According to Rebbe, who held that eitzim is really a carbon, to the extent that it requires eitzim, to the extent that it requires hagasha, the halacha would be eitzim to unin kmitza. It would need kmitza as well. Amar Papa added, Rebbe eitzim tzrichem eitzim. You have to bring eitzim with it, meaning it's literally treated as a regular carbon. If somebody says a real levayna, how much levayna does he have to bring? So there's a minimum share. It's a kaimitz. Minolan dechsev herim mimenu bekumtzai misaylas hamincha umishamna ve'eskol levayna. So the pasuk talks about the kaimitz of the silas, that was the ikr part of the mincha, and the levayna. They're in the same pasuk. The herim mimenu bekumtzai misaylas hamincha umishamna. That's the good old kaimitz. And then it says v'eskol halavayna makish levayna laharama the mincha. We compare the levayna to the part of the mincha that was set aside. In other words, the kaimitz of the mincha. Maharama the mincha kaimitz, just like the kaimitz share was a kaimitz. Af levayna nami kaimitz. So to the levayna has a share, it's going to be a kaimitz. Son Rabbana, real ilam mizbeach yavi levayna. If somebody says, I want to bring something to the mizbeach. Now, a lot of things go on the Mizbeach. Says the Braisa, he's supposed to bring Levayna. So it's probably the last thing you would think that we assume he meant to bring. Harei Laila Mizbeach, bring a Noilas Nadava, maybe a Minchas Nadava, this carbon Levayna. So the Braisa, yeah. Harei Laila Mizbeach, Yavi Levayna. And the reason is, She'en L'chadava She'karv L'gabi Mizbeach El Levayna. Because Levayna has something unique, and that is the entire carbon goes on the Mizbeach. Usually, carbonoi, so there's a chelik of the carbon that goes Levaya, but not the entire carbon. Being that Levayna is unique, the entire Levayna gets consumed on the Mizbeach. We assume that when the person said Harei Laila Mizbeach, that what he means is, I want to bring the carbon that goes completely on the Mizbeach. That is the Levayna. Says the Gemara, Pirashti ve'enu yodeh ma pirashti. What if somebody says Harei Laila Mizbeach, but he remembers that he specified a specific type of carbon that goes completely on the Mizbeach? So then the halacha is, we assume he didn't mean Levayna. Rather, Yavi mikol davar shekarv Mizbeach. Then there's more options of what it could be, and whatever option he could have meant, he's going to be obligated to bring. And the Gemara is going to explain. But first, the first halacha of the Braisa. Harei Laila Mizbeach, Yavi Levayna. And what was the reason we assume Levayna? She'en l'chadav she'karv l'gabi Mizbeach el Levayna. Because Levayna is the only carbon that goes completely on the Mizbeach. Fake the Gemara, is that true? V'sulach v'ika oila. What about the oila? The oila is kulei kol. Ika oila l'kayhanim. The oil of the carbon oila went to the kayhanim. The basar of the oila was kulei kol. The dam of the oila, obviously it did zrika with, but the oil of the kayhanim, that went to the oil of the oila went to the kayhanim. Thus, it's not something that's karev kulei l'gam mizbeach. Because oila sa'if. What about the oila sa'if? The oila sa'if didn't have oil the kayhanim. Says the Gemara, ikamura v'nutza. The murah and the v'nutza, those were the two innards of the oila sa'if that didn't go on the mizbeach. So again, it's not kulei l'mizbeach. But ikan nesachim. What about the nesachim? Like yayin, nesachim went completely on the mizbeach. So the Gemara says nesachim l'shisa azli. They went to the shisim. They weren't consumed by the mizbeach. They went through the holes down into the ground. As a result, it's not considered that it's karv l'gabi mizbeach. Va'ikam minchas nesachim. What about the minchas nesachim? So that was the mincha that came along with many of the karbanos that went completely on the mizbeach. It's true, the minchas nesachim, that was a type of mincha that went kulei l'gabi mizbeach. But there were other menachos that didn't go kulei l'gabi mizbeach. So within the world of mincha, there are menachos that are not kulei l'mizbeach. So we assume that when he says arei alai l'mizbeach, he means a carbon that's kulei l'mizbeach, and where there's no carbon similar to it that's not kulei l'mizbeach. So although there are other options that are very close to being kulei l'gam mizbeach, the oila is almost completely on the mizbeach, but it's not, because you have the or that goes to Kayanim. The oila sa'if is almost completely on the mizbeach, but it too isn't, because you have the murah v'nutza. The nesachim goes l'shisin, so it's also close, but it's not mamish karev l'gabi mizbeach. And the minchas nesachim, even though it is completely karev l'gabi mizbeach, but within the world of mincha, there are menachos that weren't karev kul l'gabi mizbeach, so we assume that's not what he meant. That's pshat in the reisha of the brayso. So again, what was the reisha? Harei alayla mizbeach yavi levayna she'en l'chadav shekarev l'gabi mizbeach ela levayna. That's unique. That does nothing close. What was the next part of the brayso? Pirashti ve'enid ma pirashti yavi mikol shekarev l'gabi mizbeach. What if the person says that I said harei alayla mizbeach, but he was mefarish something specific, he can't remember what he was mefarish. So over here, we don't automatically assume he meant Levayna. Why? Because if he automatically meant Levayna, then he wouldn't have had to been mefarish. Harei alai gabi mizbeach already means Levayna. So from the fact that he was mefarish, it's clear he wasn't necessarily thinking Levayna. So he had a broader definition of the words Harei alai mizbeach. So if you were going to take the words Harei alai mizbeach and give it a broader definition, the more specific definition is Levayna, like we just said. What would be a broader definition? Zok Rashi, it would be the four options that the Gemara just mentioned. The four things that the Gemara thought maybe the person meant when he said Arei Elai Mizbeach. The Gemara said no, he zicher meant Levaina, because only Levaina is something that's Karev Legabi Mizbeach. But at the very least, when we know that he had a broader definition of it because he was mefarish something, the Eni Yedeh Mapirashti, so he's working with, I want to bring something that's Karev Legabi Mizbeach. But I don't mean Dafka Levaina, I mean something more. What would be more? Either an oila or an oila sa'if, or he would mean the nesachim, or he would mean the minchas nesachim, and maybe meant the levina. Therefore, the halach is he would have to bring all five. Harei Elai zav lo yivchais medina. Somebody says, I want to bring zav, so the minimum share he has to bring is a dinar zav. How do you know he meant a dinar? He never said the word dinar. Maybe he has to bring a naska, just like a little, a log of gold. And something that's maybe less valuable even than the dinar zav. The Mishnah has to be talking about where he said matpeh. Vidoma priti. Maybe he meant a pruta, which is a smaller coin. I guess the matpeh was a bigger coin than a pruta. So maybe he meant the smaller coin. Nobody made such small coins. Meaning the assumption is, when he says Arei Elai zav, that we're going to force him to bring the smallest share possible. Whatever the minimum definition of zav is, that's what he's going to have to bring. And the Gemara's kasha is why is a dinar zav this small? There's gold that's smaller than a dinar zav. You could have a little piece of gold that can weigh less than a dinar zav, thus it's going to be cheaper. Or you could have a pruta shal zav. So the Gemara says you have to say it's talking about where he said matbeya, and they didn't make matbeya shal zav that was smaller than a dinar. Kesav leyifchais medina. V'doma naska, same kasha. Am Rabbi Lazar dama matbeya. V'doma priti. Am Rav Sheshes ba'asr l'sagi priti de kaspa. It was in a place where they didn't make prutas, meaning no one ever made prutas out of gold. There were places where they made prutas out of kesef. The Mishnah's halach is true where this person who made this neder lived in a place where they didn't make pruta shel kesef. But Enochinami, it sounds like if he lived in a place where they did make pruta shel kesef, so the halach is he wouldn't have to bring the dinner. Nechayches lo yivchais mima kesef. Tanya Rabbi Yaakov Omer lo yivchais mitzinoira ktana shel nechayches. Rabbi Yaakov in a brisa, Rabbi Yaakov in a brisa versus Rabbi Yaakov in a Mishnah. But Rabbi ben Yaakov in a brisa says that the minimum share is different. It's a little tool, some little tweezer that was made out of nechayches. What was it used for? Amar Abaya shemechatitim ba psilois umekanchen ba neiros. A little bit of a Hanukkah theme, but they used to use it to clean up the psilois and the neiros when they would be mative as haneiros and they would prepare the menorah to be lit. So he had this little tweezer that would go into the neiros. That's the smallest thing of nechayches, said Rabbi ben Yaakov, that there was ever any use for in the Beis HaMikdash. So if somebody says Arei Elai nechayches, he can be yoitze by bringing that barzel. What if somebody says Arei Elai barzel? He's going to bring metal. Tanya Acher Maimrim. So the halach is lo yivchais mikal yo'erev. It shouldn't be less than the kal yo'erev. So Rashi says that these were these small little blocks, like little tiles that had nails protruding from them. They used to put it on the top of the heichel, on the roof of the heichel, so that birds shouldn't come and do their thing. So either way, says the Brises. If somebody says Arei Elai barzel, that's the smallest barzel you can think of that physically had to use in the Beis HaMikdash. That's what you're mechuyev to bring. The kama, how big does this board have to be? Rabbi Yosef Amalam. Rabbi Yosef the Kal Yo'erev. The same exact thing. If somebody says he's going to bring yayin, so he has to bring a minimum of 3 lugin. Shemen. If somebody says I'm going to bring shemen leyifchais miloy. Rabbi says shloisha lugin. That just like Arei Elai yayin is leyifchais mishloisha lugin, so to Arei Elai shemen is also leyifchais mishloisha lugin. Pirashti. Let's say a person says that I made up I'm going to bring wine, or I made up I'm going to bring shemen, and he can't remember. He doesn't. I mean, he gave an amount. He just doesn't know what it is. So Harei Elai yayin stam, that's a shear. Lo yivchais mishloisha lugin. Harei Elai shemen stam, that's a shear. Lo yivchais milug according to the Tanakama, shloisha lugin according to Rabbi. But what if he says specifically that he gave a share, he just can't remember what it is? So then already you can't just be yaitz with shloisha lugin or with a lug. There the halach is you have to take the day where they brought the most shemen, or they brought the most yayin. We'll see soon what that day is, and that is the amount of shemen and yayin that you would have to bring. So Gemara Tanu Rabbanon Ezrach. It says in the pasuk Kol ha Ezrach yasa kacha es ela lahakriv yisharech l'chayich l'Hashem. That pasuk is in Parsha Shlach. It's in the context of the Nesachim. So the extra word Ezrach is melamed shemisnadvin yayin. So in addition to the yayin that came along mandatory with certain karbanos, there was a concept that a person could go and he can bring as an adava, and his adava is going to be yayin. V'kama. Let's say somebody says a real yayin. How much does he bring? Shloisha lugin. Uminayim shemratz l'hoysev yosef. How do you know that if you want to bring more than 3, you could bring more? Talmud loymer yiyah. Yiyah teaches me you could be ma'aseh. Yachal yivchais. Talmud loymer kachal. Now, what's the svara behind Shloisha Lugin? The Gemara didn't say how we know Shloisha Lugin. All you see from the Gemara is that there's some shir that's ma'akiv. Kacha, if you want, you can be ma'aseh, but it can't be less than a minimal share. But where does this minimal share come from? The makar to the minimal share is because the least amount of yayin that was ever brought with a carbon, certain carbonates had wine that was brought along with it. The least amount that was ever brought was a revias hahin. If you brought a keves as a carbon, then a sachim was a revias hahin. There's yud beis lugin in the hin. Zeh, the Gemara said, is gematria yud beis, gematria 12. Thus, a revias hahin is going to be 3 lugin. It's 1/4 of 12. That's how you come up with shloisha lugin. So again, it's based on the minimum, just like the shnei gezirim. Harei alai eitzim. Why shnei gezirim? Because the minimum of eitzim was always shnei gezirim. Harei alai levayna. It always had to be a kaimet. Zahav, kesef, nechayshis. It's along the same thing. Harei alai yayin. The reason it has to be shloisha lugin because the minimum nisachim of yayin that you ever found was 3 shemen. What if it was oil? So here it's already machlek. So yivches min alug. Tanakama said it has to be look. Rabbi says shloish. Maikom if what's machlek? Zamru Rabbanan came to Rapapa. Bedoin mino bedoin mino. Va'ike ba'asra kamiflagi. It's not a very local specific machlekes as it relates to harei olai shemen, but it's really totally in a general machlekes that comes up in many places in Shas, and that is if you're going to learn A from B. So you have Parsha A, you have Parsha B. And we're learning a halacha in A from B. Do you say that when you learn this halacha that's in B and apply it to A, you have to take it with all the details of the way it is in B? Or no, you just can learn the basic halacha, but as it relates to the Shulchan Aruch and the details that are going to govern this halacha, you look at what the halachas are with regards to A. So, conceptually a little tricky, but the Gemara explains it very nicely. Says the Gemara, what's the machlokes? Rabbanan, Savi the Rabbanan hold dain mina umina. What's the makar that a person could bring a nadava of oil? It's learned out from the carbon mincha. Ma mincha misnadvin av shemen nami misnadvin. That is the makar, that there's a concept of a nadava that's made up of shemen. And being that we learn shemen from mincha, doin mina umina. So now when we relate this concept of a nadava of shemen, we have to take with it all the halachas of mincha. Because being that we're learning shemen from mincha, I can't just learn the basic halacha that I could bring a nadava of shemen just like I could bring a mincha. And now we're going to apply the halachas of shemen to how this nadava of shemen is brought. No. Doin mina umina. If I'm learning shemen from mincha, so now the way you bring a nadava of shemen is going to have to conform to the way you bring a carbon mincha. Ma mincha beloik. Av shemen b'loik. Just like a mincha came along with a like shemen, so too, when you bring shemen as a standalone nadava, it's going to be brought with a like shemen as well. Rabbi holds doim minava iki ba'asra. No, it's true that we learn the basic halacha that in a nadava of shemen I could bring from a mincha, but at the same time, all I need to learn is the basic halacha. Once I know there's a concept of a nadava that's merely shemen, I now can relate it to its own halachas. So ma mincha misnadin av shemen nami misnadin, but not doin mina umina. Now I'm going to learn the shir from mincha as well. Rather va'iki ba'asra kinesachin man nesachin shleishas lugin av shemen nami shleishas lugin. What's the va'iki ba'asra? If there's halacha now that I can bring shemen is going to be a form of nesachin. Usually when you think of nesachin, you think of wine. There's also the Nisach HaMayim that was brought on Sukkot, but Shemen is going to be another form of Nesachim. What's the shear of Yayin? We said the shear is Shleishas Lugin. Everybody holds a Shleishas Lugin because the minimum shear Nesachim that you ever had was the Keves, which was a Revi'as Ahin, which is Shleishas Lugin. So it's true the concept that there's a new type of Nesachim called Shemen that I learned out from Mincha, but as it relates to the shear, I'm not going to apply the halachas of Mincha. I'm going to apply the halachas of Nesachim. If I'm applying the halachas of Mincha always has a like Shemen. That's doim mina umina. If I'm going to apply the halachas of Nesachim, then I'm going to learn it from Yayin, which has a shir of Shleishas Lugin. Either way, so the Rabbanon, the Lamdim came in Beis Medrash, and they said that we believe that the beer in the Machlekes, Rebbe and the Rabbanon, is the good old Machlekes of Doim mina umina or Doim mina va'iki ba'asra. I'm learning the Nadav of Shemen from Mincha. So do we say just a Doim mina umina? If I'm learning from Mincha, I need the shir of Mincha. That's going to be like, or no, Doim mina va'iki ba'asra. All I need to do is learn learned the basic halacha, but now I look at it as regular nesachim, and the minimum shir nesachim is always going to be shloishes lugin. But the Gemara said, Amalu Rapapa told the Chachamim, no. If Rebbe and the Chachamim both agree that the makar to the concept of an adava made up of oil is learnt out from the carbon mincha, the kuli amalei pligi dami namina, everybody would hold doin mina umina. Meaning everybody would hold that the halacha is it should be a like shemen, because as it relates to the more global machlekes, there really is no machlekes. Ela Rebbe Ibn Ezra Gamalot. You said of Shitas Rebbe. The reason Rebbe holds a shloishes lugin is not because Daimina Vaykiv Asra, because he learned the concept that there's something called a carbon of shemen, that you can bring a new type in a sakam of shemen, not from mincha. He learned it from the parish of Nesachim as well, from the pasuk that says Kola Ezra Chiyase Kochas Elu Lahakriv Isha Reach Nechayich Lashem. The pasuk that the Gemara brought right in the beginning to tell me is the makar that there's a nadava of yayin. That, according to Rebbe, is also the makar that there's a nadava of shemen. So, being that it's learned out from the parish of Nesachim, it's for that reason it conforms with the halachas of Nesachim. But if it would have been learned out from the parish of Mincha, it would have to conform to the halachas of Mincha. Meaning, the machlokes is not doin mino v'ayki ba'asr. Rather, the machlokes is a more specific machlokes. It's what is the makar that you could bring in a dove of shemen. Is it learned out from mincha or is it learned out from the sachim? If it's learned out from mincha, then doin mino, the shir is going to be alike. If it's learned out from the sachim, then doin mino, the shir is going to be gimel login. Says the Gemara, Omar le Rav Huna, Breid Rav Nasson Rav Papa, mi masas amrit hachi. But could you say that? Is it possible to say that is the machlokes? To the brayso carbon melamishim is not in shemen. We learn from the parish of mincha that you can bring in a dove of shemen. The kamma, what's this year? Shloish lugin, says the Gemara Geshmak. Man shamalei dama shloish lugin. Who is the one that holds shloish lugin? Rebbe. V'kom islami carbon, and here it says clearly learns it from the word not from Ezrach in the parish of Nesachim. He learns it out from mincha. Must be because he holds doin mina v'oiki ba'asra. So Rav Huna, Breid, Rav Nasson told Rav Papa, no, the Lamdam are right. You can't tell me that everybody holds doim mino, and the machlekes is whether you learn it from mincha, you learn it from the sachim. Because I have a mefurish brayso, an anonymous brayso that I know for sure is Rebbe, because it says shloishes lugin, and in the brayso mefurish it says that the makar is from mincha. If doim mino and the makar is mincha, then the shir would be alike. Amalei, so Rav Papa told Rav Huna, Breid, Rav Nasson, no, Tanya, it's such a brayso, I'm not going to argue. Then must be, you're right, and the beer and the machlekes Rebbe and the Chachamim is, in fact, the more global machlekes, whether doim mino v'oiki ba'as. What if somebody says that I took upon myself to bring shemen, I took upon myself to bring yayin, and I don't remember how much shemen, how much yayin. So here you can't be yaitza with 3 lugin or 1 lug or 3 lugin. Rather, yavi kiyay meruba. So you have to take the day where the most shemen and the most wine was brought in the Beis Hamikdash, respectively. That's the maximum share, but that's how much you're going to have to bring. Tana, what is that day? If the first day Sukkot fell out on a Shabbos, so that's the halach. So we had this already last week. If the first day of Sukkot fell out on a Shabbos, so there were a lot of korbanos that were brought. Number one, you had the 13 parim that were brought on the first day Sukkot. So there were 70 parim that were brought on the 7 days of Sukkot. Keneged the shivim umos. And the amount were peiches v'hoilach. It was 13 the first day, 12 the second day, 11 the third day, 10 the fourth day, etc. So you had the 13 parim. Every day Sukkot there were 14 kvasim that were brought. Every day Sukkot there were 2 elim that were brought. Every day of the year, 365 days a year, you had the 2 Tmidim that were brought. If Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, you also had the 2 Kvasim that were brought as part of the Musfei Shabbos. If that's the case, so if you do the math of how much shemen and how much yayin you're going to have to bring, the number you're going to get is 140 lugin. And incidentally, it's the same number for shemen as it is for wine, because the shir shemen and the shir yayin were the same. The par had to have a chatzi hin of shemen and yayin. A chatzi hin is 6 lugin. There were 13 parim the first day Sukkot, so it's 13 times 6, which is 78. There were 14 kvasim. Each keves had a revius ahin. A revius ahin is 3 lugin. It says 14 times 3, which is 42. There were 2 elin. Each ayil had a shlishas ahin. A shlishas ahin is 4 lugin. Again, if you want to do the math. So it's 2 times 4, you get 8. Then you had the 2 kvasim, which were the carbon tamid. Each keves again had a revius ahin, which is 3 lugin. So it's 2 times 3 is 6. And then you had the 2 kvasim, which were the carbon musif. Again, Each keves has a revius ayin, so it's 2 times 3 is 6. If you do the math, it's 78 plus 42 plus 8 plus 6 plus 6. The number you end up getting is 140. Would we have this last week? Because last week we were discussing the halacha of the Isroinos, that if somebody says, I want to bring a mincha, very, very big mincha, so it has to be in multiples of an isar. The minimum share of a mincha, as far as the amount of soilus goes, had to be an isarai. What's the maximum share? The maximum share is 60. So what's the cheshbon? So Reb Shimon famously says, because only up to 60 could you do bila. More than 60, you can't do bila. Bila is not ma'akiv. It's true, it's not ma'akiv, but it has to be right bila. Kala right bila ma'akeves. But chol she'en right bila ma'akev. But the Chacham gave a different reason. Chacham said because the maximum amount of soilus that was ever brought one day in the Beis HaMikdash was 61 esrainos. So if the tzibur, the most they ever brought was 61, dayoi yachid, he should be a little bit less than the tzibur, and therefore the maximum is going to be 60. What was the cheshbon then? It was the same cheshbon. It was if the first day Sukkot fell out on Shabbos, if you did the math, you would end up with 61. The bottom line is, it's the most karbanos ever brought, and from a mandatory perspective, was the first day Sukkot when it fell out on a Shabbos, and it impacts basic halachas in Menachos. Number one, the maximum shear of how big a mincha could be, as far as the amount of soilus, is 60 esroinas, according to the Chacham in the Mishnah, based on the fact that the most that was ever mandatory to bring for the tzibur was 61. And as we see now, it impacts. If somebody says, Harei olai shemen, harei olai yayin, I don't remember how much, the most that you could possibly bring is 140. Here we don't say one less. And here the shear is going to end up being 140. Either way, Dr. Mishnah, Harei olai oila. Let's say somebody says, I'm going to bring a carbon oil. So the Torah in the beginning of Parshas Vayikra says that if somebody says he's going to bring a carbon oil, so the oil can be either min habakar, it could be tsoin, or it could be a knife. You could bring an oilas knife as well. So what if somebody says, Harei olai oila? So the halach is yavi keves. He can be yaitza with a keves. Rashi says, because the keves, the sheep, is pachos sheba oilas. Incidentally, Rashi says it has to be a keves, not a kivsa, because an oila had to be a zachar, and as a result, it would have to be the male version. Bottom line is a male sheep. That's the cheapest possible oil you can bring. Again, the theme is the cheapest that's reasonable that he may have meant. As a result, Harei olai oila yavi keves. It says no, it could be even cheaper. Oitar ben yaina. That's even cheaper than that. Pirashti min habakar ve'eni yedeh ma pirashti. What if the person says that I said Harei olai oila min habakar? I just don't remember what type of bakar it was. Says the Mishnah, there's two options. It could either be a par or it could be an egel. Now, a par and an egel are the same thing. The difference is one is older than the other. The egel is when it's younger, the par is when it's older. They're both bakar. The point is that being that he's not sure what he was mefarish, could be he meant a par, could be he meant an egel. If he meant par, he can't bring egel, and if he said egel, he can't bring a par. Thus, he has no choice. The only way to do it is by bringing both. Mina behema. What if he says, "I'm going to bring an oila mina behema"? I don't remember what type of behema it was. So there, you have to bring all the possibilities of an oila within the world of behema. So it's par ve'egel, it's ayil v'sa'ir, it's gedi v'tle. So either it's going to be a bull, it's going to be a sheep, or it's going to be a goat, and it's going to be the older one or the younger one, the par or the egel. It could be the ayil or the tle. It could be the seir or the gedi. The bottom line is only the zchar, not the nekevis, because an oila always has to be a zachar, like the kliyakar. How do you remember that oila always has to be a zachar? Because an oila is mechaper on hirhure avera. Someone that had inherited to do an avera, and then he was able to overcome his yetzahara, so he showed gvura. Chatas is always in a keva. The exception is the nasi. If he did an avera, his chatas had to be a zachar. But ordinarily, almost all chatas was in a keva. Why? Because the person that brought a chatas actually did the avera. So he was toshash koichak in a keva. As a result, he has to bring the keva, the kliyakar, right in the beginning of Parshas Vayikra. But either way, so it has to be min habakar or min hatzoin. He said min habehema, so we know it's either bakar or tzoin. It has to be a zachar. So there's 6 options: par, egel, ayil, sar, gniv, tle. He has to bring a whole cocktail of karbonis. It is what it is. What if he said, I said a real oila, and I can't remember what I said? I don't even know if I said mena behema. So Moisef Aleim, Torah ben Yoina. So he has to bring the previous 6 that we just mentioned. Here there's 2 additional possibilities. That's the Torah ben Yoina. Really, like Toidu Shlamim. What if somebody said, I'm going to bring a Toidu Shlamim? So again, he didn't specify what animal it's going to be. The cheapest Toidu or the cheapest Shlamim is a keves. Pirashti min bakr v'nedei ma pirashti. What if he says, I said I'm going to bring a Toidu Shlamim? I said it's going to be bakr. I just can't remember what. So Yavi paru para, ego ve'egla. So it has to be bakar, so it's going to be a par and egel. But being that the shlomim can be a zachar or an akeva, so here there's 4 karbanas he has to bring. He has to bring a par and a para, an egel and an egel. When it was an oila, it had to be a zachar, so it's only a par and egel. Couldn't have meant a para and an egel. Can't be an oila. But in a toid and a shlomim, it could be a male or a female. Thus, it's a par and a egel. What if he says, I took upon myself to bring a toid and a shlomim, mina behema, ve'enu yedeh ma pirashti. So here it's already a whole chad gadia, literally. Yavi paru para, egel ve'egla, ayol urechela, seiru seira, gediu gedia, klavikli. It's the same thing. You just have to add in a keva version. What if somebody says, I'm going to bring a shar? So the halach is yavi hu unechasav b'mana. So he has to bring a shar. That's pretty straightforward. Nesachim have to come along with the shar. The halach is how much nesachim? It's a mana's worth of nesachim. Mechatesi. Rashi says, Kach nisparish dinoi b'torah shabapeh. Very interesting. Egel, what if he says egel? Yavi hu nechasa b'chamesh. Then the nesachav has to be 5 slime. Ayil, yavi hu nesachav b'shnayim. It should be 2 slime. Again, it's all torah shabapeh. Keves, yavi hu nesachav b'sel. Shar b'mana. What if he says, I want the shar to be b'mana? So then the halacha is yavi b'mana chutz min nesachav. So then the shar itself has to be worth a mana. And the nesachav, that's a separate cheshbon. Egel b'chamesh, yavi b'chamesh chutz min nesachav. So again, if somebody says a re'olai shar, then you just bring a shar, and then a nesachav has to be up to a mana. But when he says shar b'mana, now the shar itself has to be a mana. So in addition to the shar being a mana, you have to add now another mana's worth in the nesachav. So again, egel b'chamish, yavi b'chamish, chutz min nesachav, ayel b'shnayim, yavi b'shnayim, chutz min nesachav, yavi b'sela, yavi b'sela, chutz min nesachav. Shar b'mana. What if somebody said shar b'mana? Vehevi shnayim b'mana la yatsa, because it has to be 1 sharbon. Meaning, if you brought 2 shvarim, each one was worth a half a mana. So together they combined to the mana. He didn't satisfy his obligation. Even though, what do you mean? You brought shar, you brought mana. Yeah, but you said 1 shar mana. You brought 2 shvarim that together are mana. Even if one of them is almost a mana, and the other one is also almost a mana, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you need one that's a mana. So, in other words, what you brought ended up being almost double what you promised you were going to bring. But you still didn't bring what you said you were going to bring. You said you were going to bring a shar b'mana. You never brought a shar b'mana. Shachar, they be lavan. What if somebody says, I'm going to bring a black shar, and he brought a lavan? Lavan, vehevi shachar. Gadol, he said he's going to bring a big one, vehevi katan. All in these cases, la yatsa. Katan, vehevi gadol. What if he says he's going to bring a small one, and they're bringing a bigger one? The halach is yatsa. Why? Because b'chlal Messiah mana. Because within the big one you have a small one. Rebbe says la yatsa. Either way, the Mishnah said a lot of halachas, and the Gemara is going to go through this. So the first halacha of the Mishnah was harei like oila. So somebody says I'm going to bring an oila. So you bring the minimal shir oila. What is the minimal shir oila? It says machlokes in the Mishnah. Tanakama says yavi keves. You bring a sheep. What's the machlokes? So the Gemara no machlokes really. V'loi pligi marki asrei or marki asrei. In the Tanakama's land, in his shtetl where he lived, a keves was cheaper than a Torah ben Yaina. And that's interesting, because the Torah ben Yaina is the carbon dollars. But either way, it was cheaper. And because it was cheaper, he held. That was the minimum, his possible obligation. Thus, you bring a keves. From Azariah's town, the Torah ben Yaina, that was cheap. Tanur Rabbanon. I really like oila b'sela. If somebody says, I'm going to bring an oila b'sela l'mizbeach. So the halach is yavi keves. He has to bring a keves. Why? Because the keves was usually a seller. So if he said a real like oila besela, presumably what he meant was the keves. What if he said harei like oila besela, but he knows he was mefarish something, meaning he didn't just say those words. He went into detail. He explained himself a little bit. Then the halach is he can't just bring a keves. Because again, if he meant a keves, he would not have had to been mefarish. From the fact that he was mefarish, that's a raya that he didn't necessarily, he could be meant a keves, not necessarily. There, the halach is, Yavim called Davish a kari b'sela gav mizbech. So he has to go to the shuk with a seller and see what he could buy. If you can buy a gedi, you're going to have to bring a gedi. If you could buy an egel, you have to bring an egel. If you buy a par, if you buy a toy, you can buy ben yoina. Anything that you can possibly buy for a seller that can be brought as a carbon oila, you're now going to have to bring. So again, if he just said a real like oila basela, there's a svara he meant the keves. But we know for sure he didn't necessarily mean the keves. Might have meant it, but we can't say for sure that's what he meant. Now already we have a suffix. He has to satisfy his obligation. Pirashti pirashti. So the halach is yavi par ve'egel. So if somebody said, I know I said bakar, I just can't remember what it was. So you bring the par. which is the bigger one, and you bring the egel, which is a calf. That's the smaller one. The lacy par, why don't you just bring a par? And in the par, you'll have the egel. Because isn't the egel included in the par as in Bechlal Masayim Mana? So the Gemara says, Amani Rebbe, this is Rebbe, who was mentioned in the last line of the Mishnah. If somebody says, I'm going to bring katan, and he brought a gadol yatsa. Why? Because even though there is a katan within the gadol, the egel is within the par, but at the end of the day, you said katan. At the end of the day, you said egel. So just like katan, we don't say as Bechlal Masayim Mana in the gadol, so to the egel is not Bechlal Mayim Sana. So either way, it's up to Gemara, the Reish of the Mishnah, that says that if you said, I'm going to bring an oilam and a bakar, the any idea ma pirashti, you have to bring the bigger one and the smaller one, we don't say b'chal masayim mana, it's going according to Rebbe, who's the last line in the Mishnah, who said, clearly you don't say b'chal masayim mana. But the Gemara says, Rebbe, if that's the case, a maseifa. The seif of the Mishnah already brought Rebbe, right? But what was the setup to the seif? A shar b'mana, the heavy shnayim b'mana. If somebody says, I'm going to bring a shar for a mana, and you brought two shvarim that together equal the mana, la yatsa. V'afilu zeh b'mana chaser dina, v'zeh b'mana chaser dina. Also, you're not going to be yatsa. At the end of the day, you need one shar that's a mana. And if you bring two shvarim, each one is almost a mana, even though the net amount that you donated to Beis Hamikdash was much more than you promised, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you didn't bring what you said you were going to bring. Shachar v'hevi lavan. If you said you're going to bring black, you brought white. Lava v'hevi shachar. Gadol v'hevi katan, la yatsa. Kata v'hevi gadol. What if it was kata v'hevi gadol? It was machlekes. The Tanakama said yatsa. Rebbe yomer la yatsa. Now, if you're going to tell me that the Reish of the Mishnah that says harei like bakar and pirashti v'eredei ma pirashti, that lochas you have to bring a par and an egel. Why can't you just bring the par? You don't say b'chal masayim mana because Hamani Rebbe that said kata v'hevi gadol you're not yotza. So it's going to come out. The Reish of the Mishnah is Rebbe. The Seif of the Mishnah is Rebbe. Umitziyas Rabbanan. And in the middle we threw in the Rabbanan Chita who said gadol v'hevi kata v'hevi gadol la yotza. So the Gemara, is that reasonable to say? So the Gemara says, yeah, in Reish of the Seif of Rebbe mitziyas Rabbanan. It's not so schwer. The Reish of the Seif is Rebbe. The Rabbanan. V'achi kamer davazem achloik is Rebbe Rabbanan. And really, the way you read the Mishnah is the Mishnah says Allah. If someone says a real like bakar, pirashti, pirashti, you have to bring the bigger one and the smaller one. So the Mishnah. By the way, FYI, you should know really it's a machlokes. What's the machlokes? Because it was machlokes Rebbe and the Rabbanon regarding katan v'hevi gadol, where the Rabbanon said yatsa because you say b'chal masayim mana. Rebbe said la yatsa, that you don't say that. So really, this shaila, this psak that you have to bring the par and the egel is only according to Rebbe, who holds you don't say b'chal masayim mana, but enochanami according to Rabbanon. You do say b'chlal masayim mana, and as a result, you would only have to bring the par. You would not have to bring the egel.